Again, for another time, welcome to the Brown Bag Lunch guest speaker series. And I'm going to introduce Jessica Vitak, who is going to introduce our guest speaker today. Many of you may know him, but Jessica will tell us more. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica.
Great, thanks, Beth. So I'm going to keep this brief to give Kent as much time as possible to share with us. But Kent Norman is a longtime HCIL member, maybe back from the very beginning, if not the very first days and very early on. He was a professor in the psychology department at UMD from 1976 back and up until 2018 when he retired. And he's published many books and articles connecting psychology to HCI. So doing some of that important work in bridging the social sciences and more of the computing sciences. His research has been on things like judgment and decision-making, interface design, usability, and many other HCI-related topics. Today, he's talking about information integration theory and the human-computer interface. I'm really excited to hear more about this. So I will pass it over to you, Kent.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be a fun opportunity, I hope. So we'll see how it goes. See if I can switch to the right sharing screen. And so hopefully you see the introduction slide.
Yep, that looks great.
Yes, good. Okay. All right. Well, so yes, I was one of the founding members of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab with Ben Schneiderman and actually another colleague in psychology. And I had really become so fascinated with computers, basically because I had been using computers in my research up until that point in 1984. And so I'm actually going to go back before that point to my graduate school days to kind of resurrect some of the work that I had done back at that point. So that's going to be, how did I get into all of this? What is information integration theory, which is really kind of the founding model upon which, kind of all of your thinking goes. There's these formative points in your life, in your education, where you get this viewpoint, kind of this world viewpoint of how the system works. And this was kind of instilled in me at that point. Then I'm going to talk about some of its early applications and problems. Then the big problem that I solved, I thought, some more applications, and then finally getting into how I should have, or we should now be applying information integration theory to problems at the human-computer interface. So I got into psychology only because of a thing called mathematical psychology. Counseling psychology, clinical psychology, all scared me. And all of after taking a course on introduction to psychology, I was going to switch majors and go into computer science or engineering or something like that. Until I took this course on learning theory, where he actually talked about mathematics, mathematical models of learning. So I then went to graduate school at the University of Iowa. So that's me way back then in early 70s in my office with a book, lined up books of mathematical psychology. I got into psychophysical scaling with this one professor, Donald Dorfman, that I owe a lot to, and my own mentor, Professor Erwin Levin. And so he introduced me to this thing called information integration theory, which was the brainchild of this guy here, Norman Anderson. So I figured there was a connection between him and me with his first name and my last name. And the professor that also helped to found the Human-Computer Interaction Lab, Nancy Anderson. So it's kind of a nice combination of names. Anyway, so he was at the University of California in San Diego, a beautiful place overlooking the ocean. And he had this theory on how people integrate multiple pieces of information. And we do this all the time, whether you're looking at, buying something, whether you're looking at a potential friend, you're looking at social media stuff, you're looking at news, everything we do is a function of multiple information, how we integrate it, and then how we use that information. So he developed a bunch of experimental methods, and I loved experimental methods. You know, I was really into statistics, experimental design, and it basically is founded on factorial designs. So the crossing of multiple factors, presenting all of those factors in that design, so you can look at how one factor interacts with another factor. This is his model. That's the picture frame that I had in my office for years up above my desk that I had created. And it shows on the left-hand side the first process called valuation, where we take external information, whether it's verbal stuff, pictorial stuff, stuff on the screen, stuff you hear, and we convert that external stimulus into an internal subjective feeling or value. So there's a lot that revolves around that transition from external to internal. Then once we have the internal bits of information, we combine it in some sort of a way. So there's a cognitive process by which we combine stuff. Depending on what stuff it is, we might have different ways of doing it, and different models are proposed that we add stuff together, we average things together, we might multiply it, and all kinds of different functions that I'll go through very quickly in this talk today. Then we come up with an overall feeling or assessment internally, but then we have to convert it to an external thing. Like maybe it's a decision. I buy the product, I don't buy the product. I put it here on the rating scale or there on the rating scale. You know, these days we're always asked, you know, what is your pain level on a 1 to 10 scale or a 1 to 20 scale? And so that's that last process of externalizing that piece of information. So in the early days was applied to tons of different conditions, psychophysical scaling, in which we presented, you know, I laughed the other day because I was just going over this size weight illusion, and this Amazon driver delivered these 2 large boxes, and he left them at the front for me to carry down, saying they're really light. And I knew what was in them, so I knew they were really light, but they were big. Now, this is a kind of an interaction. So something that's very small in the same weight as something that's very big actually is perceived as being heavier. So there's a lot of experiments doing that, looking at varying both of those. Person perception is a huge field in social psychology about how much you would like to have somebody as a friend. Based on a bunch of adjectives. I ran a bunch of experiments with Irwin Levin on that as well. Risk assessment is being done. I'm reviewing a paper by one of my colleagues now on assessing the risk of taking the different vaccines with the probability that it'll lead to some adverse effect, the effectiveness of it, the cost of the vaccine, et cetera. In graduate school, I got into this thing called motor averaging. That's what I'm going to talk about for a minute. And then I'll talk more about expected performance with computers and stuff like that. So that's the person perception stuff. I just want to briefly say we had different adjectives, and you can see people add the 2 together. So if you have multiple adjectives that are more and more positive, the ratings get higher and higher about how much you would like to have that person as a friend. So this is the thing that I got into. Is kind of when I was in graduate school, I wanted to get out of graduate school as fast as possible because it was in the University of Iowa in Iowa City during the coldest winter ever. Stuff around here is nothing, you know, compared to winters in Iowa. So this was an interesting experiment in which you'd have a ruler, and I don't know if I can use my cursor, but anyway, so the block on the left would be moved by the participant up to the second block on the right, set by the experimenter. So you'd make one movement this long, I would set the block, they would make a second movement, maybe longer, and then they're told to produce the average of the 2 blocks. And so then I move it out of the way, they'd kind of fiddle around to where they thought the average between the two distances was. And this was repeated and repeated and repeated. Norman Anderson kind of viewed that integration rule as being kind of a fixed thing, and that we could research. And my idea, kind of growing out of a lot of the stuff in psychology, was that the mind is really plastic, and that we learn things, we change our viewpoints, at least back in the 70s, I think we did. And so I thought if we presented a different feedback to the subjects, we could actually change what they thought was the average to a different point. So after they made the movement of what they thought was the average, I said, oh, well, it's actually like 4 centimeters greater than you just put, or 4 centimeters less. And so I changed the feedback so that it conformed to 4 different rules. The first rule was the first movement was weighted twice as much as the second one. The second rule, they weighted the second movement more. The third rule, they weighted the shorter one more. And the last one, they weighted, it should be the longer, I said a second, should be the longer distance more, whichever, first or second. And so this was repeated. This is a boring experiment, even for me. Sitting there, I've actually got this thing still here, if you look at my picture thing. So I would sit there and move this thing, they would move it, and this would go on for a long period of time.
And can I interrupt real quick? Eric has a question. Can you tell us what you mean by a weighted movement?
Oh, so you see in the equation, there's S1 and S2 are the distances, and they're given a weight of 0.75 in one case and a 0.25. So the first rule, it has a larger weight than the second one. All right. And the second rule, they have a larger weight on the second movement. So it's given a larger weighting in each one of these rules. And so the weights add up to 1 to produce the average. For a regular average, it would be 0.5, 0.5. All right. So over time, they got closer and closer to the rule that I had set. So I, said kind of, Norman Anderson, aha, see, people do learn, people can change their rules over time. And this is probably true with many, many different integration functions. We're really products of our expectations and the feedback that we get over time. So this is just kind of to get into a little more practical research. I had this friend who was in, we had taken multiple classes together in math modeling, and he was into geography and transportation. And so he had this experiment that I got involved in, having to do with the likelihood of somebody riding a bus based on different information about the bus system. And so we varied the cost of the fare going from, this was back in early days, of 15 cents, 30 to 45 cents, the frequency of service, whether it came every 15 minutes, every half hour, or every hour, and then how close the bus stop was to your home, so a half a block, 3 blocks, or 9 blocks away. So we created a full factorial design that led to 27 different combinations. So again, it was kind of a tedious experiment for the subjects because they had to go through each one of these. And we actually repeated these 27 10 times over 2 different sessions in the day. We were really into replication and seeing if there was like variability in their ratings over time, so we could take the average of all of their ratings together. We were also in kind of trying to avoid numeric scales or number scales, 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. So we actually used a line mark scale. So we had a line that was 100 centimeters or millimeters long, and they made a little pencil mark on it. And then we sat down and got our little ruler and measured each one of those and converted it to numbers and plugged it into, punched it up on computer cards at that point. We used up a lot of these little guys, computer cards. This is on a little drum. So they did this, and we proposed the integration function they were most likely to use would be some kind of a multiplicative function. So here the subjective values are weighted by a power and multiplied together to result in a response on that 100-point scale. And what we wanted to do was actually measure the subjective values of each one of those stimuli and their weights. How much did they weight proximity versus fare versus frequency of service? But it turned out that there was a problem with information integration theory at that point. You couldn't solve for the weights. So we had to assume a couple things. One was that there was a common origin on all of the scale values. So we just arbitrarily set that at 1. And the resulting graph looked like this. So indeed, the higher the cost of the fare, the less likely they were to ride the bus. The further away it was, the less likely they were to ride the bus. And of course, frequency of service also, if it got lower and lower, then they were less likely to ride the bus. We were able to create kind of a subjective spacing of the stimuli, so we could scale how they perceived the amount of money and the frequency of service and the proximity in terms of how far they had to walk. That was good, but again, we could not get any information really about how much they weighted one scale versus another scale. So I was done with graduate school, and I went on a postdoc to visit, yes, Norman Anderson in San Diego. It was hard to spend time in my office because it was so close to a beautiful beach. So, but there I am in my office, again, way back in the day. And Anderson gave me this problem about how do you estimate the weights? And there was no way to do it with the current experimental designs that were being used, because we presented all of the information, so everything was kind of bundled together in one ball of wax that could not be split apart. So I don't know whether it was one of those epiphanies, kind of, we talk about with problem solving where you take a vacation. I went down to Black's Beach, came back, and aha, there was this thought, why not leave information out? Instead of presenting all of the factors of information, leave something out and just say, well, we don't know. That happens. We don't know how much something is. We don't know what one of the factors is, maybe with one of the vaccines, or information about some person or some fact we don't know. So you just have to base your judgment on what you do know. So, so then we could actually separate the two. So it led to the design of a new procedure called the method of differential information. So let's say I have 3 different factors, A, B, and C. And instead of all of them together, I just present A and B combinations in the first box there. Then in the second, I can present just A and C, so you don't know what B is. And then the third, B and C, so you don't know what A is. So in each one of these combinations, it's relative to the other one and not to the third. Then we can also present all three together, so we have everything relative to one another. And essentially, if you know much about factorial designs and analysis of variance, you can get the size of each one of these factors relative to each other. And that's just what we wanted, to be able to compare. How does A compare with B? How does B compare with C? How does A compare with C? And then how does each compare with each other when the other one is also known? So that's in the last full factorial design in the bottom right. So we did that, and lo and behold, you could separate them. But then the question was, well, I really want to be able to estimate all the parameters. So so it's really a combination of stuff in mathematical psychology and my old professors from back in Iowa that got me into a parameter estimation procedure called maximum likelihood estimation. And I'm not going to even try to delve into it, but I wrote a program that used maximum likelihood estimation. It sort of estimates the probability of getting the data that you observed based on the parameters that you're assuming. And then it tries to get the best parameters to create the maximum likelihood of the data that you got. So I wrote this paper in '76 on exactly how to solve for the weights and scale values. Sometimes I wonder, I spent a lot of time writing computer programs. And of course, the first program back in the day they were all in Fortran. So I wrote a program in Fortran, and it was a real bestseller. Maybe like 20 or 30 people used it. And that's probably an exaggeration. But it used that method and a very special thing called the Newton-Raphson method to be able to approximate it, because you can't actually solve directly all the equations that are involved. It's kind of intractable, so you have to use this other system for it. So that program chugged along for a while until finally, I think I was at some conference, people that actually do still use Fortran, but I rewrote it in JavaScript in 2002, and a colleague of mine, which hasn't been kept up, unfortunately, but a colleague of mine just released a website in which he does parameter estimation for these designs, not using maximum likelihood estimation, but using it's an okay procedure of least squares estimation. And I'll have a reference for that at the end. So there I was, came to the University of Maryland and reran the study on ridership, but now using 4 different factors. And the reason for the additional factor was to find out how the weights between the 3 before change when it's a function of the purpose of the travel, whether it's for work or for leisure. So as you can see, I've got a 4-way design, but we're presenting the 3-way designs so we can get the relative comparison of one factor being missing. And the data on the right shows how it happens, how this occurs with a frequency of service of every, or in service of every 12 hours to 24 hours. The number of blocks going from 2, 4 to 8. And let's see, the walking distance, walking distance. And the fare going again from 15 to 45 cents. So we got the right, kind of look of the data. It's a multiplicative model because the lines are kind of converging. They're not parallel. And so we proposed that kind of multiplying model. And then using the program SIMILE, came up with these weights and scale values. This is a very interesting graph on the left. The width of each horizontal bar shows the relative weight. So on the top, you can see that fare is really weighted the largest because it's the widest bar. Walking distance is second, and then time and service is the least for the work trip. If you look down at the next one, for a leisure trip, time and service is much more important because, hey, it's leisure. You want to, come back from the movies, or you want to come back from the park. So the time and service is much more important. But in both of these, fare has the largest importance. Walking distance has a second importance. And what flips between leisure trip and work trip is the importance of number of stops and time and service. Also, there's kind of a difference between, let's see, the walking distance for a work trip 2 and 4 is much larger than the walking distance 2 and 4 on a leisure trip, because, hey, it's leisure, it doesn't matter as much if you have to walk a little bit further. So we found that kind of interesting and useful. So these models of information integration, I said, were applied to lots and lots of different things. Well, so this colleague of mine got his first job down in Australia teaching, and got affiliated with a group there, a consulting group. And he said, why don't we, they were interested in getting information about the likelihood of Australians paying for cable television. Okay, this was back in 1982, I guess. And so this company decided to run a study for the government on whether they should put in this cable TV service. Now they knew that Australians would watch, the sports and other things on cable, but they were interested in whether they might be interested in kind of online services, online banking, online shopping on cable. This kind of very, way before Amazon and Google, but so it was all on just broadcast, cable, cable television. So they wanted to look at different alternatives, and we kind of had the model to do that with the bus ridership of cost of service, cable programming, and different online services. And I'm not going to go through the design and techniques, but they wanted to do this with participants across Australia, and I thought that was great. So we divvied up, our trips to train the different personnel that would go out door to door and give them the options of different combinations of offerings to them. And so I got to go to Melbourne and to up to the Great Barrier Reef, and things like that. So it was a lot of fun. Bottom line, I'm not going to I can't present the results exactly, but they loved cable. They would pay for this stuff, and we loved traveling around training interviewers. So that was my little group there. I got bored a lot just being at Maryland, so I applied for a Fulbright fellowship to go to India for 6 months to study, to do research with some guy there, Ramatar Singh, that had been a student in the United States at Purdue and had studied information integration theory. He was looking at the way in which Indians combine information about motivation and ability to produce expected performance. So this was the proposed model that that the observed outcome of how much somebody would do would be a function, a multiplicative function of their ability and their motivation. So if you have great ability, but you're just not motivated, it's not going to do a whole lot. If you are highly motivated and you don't have ability to do something, that's not going to work. So it's that product of when you're highly motivated and you've got a lot of abilities, that's that highest point in the diagram. But that's not what they were finding in India. They were really finding more of an averaging model. That is that even somebody with low ability, if they were motivated, could perform. And even somebody with high ability that's not motivated would perform. So in a sense, there was a cultural difference that was going on, different from kind of the Western expectation of multiplying models. And there's a lot of, conjecture about why that was actually the case. But my road into this was through the introduction of computers, because we have kind of the same expectation that if you have somebody with great ability and you give them a really junky computer, like a Timex Sinclair computer back in the day, they wouldn't be able to do a whole lot. Or if you gave somebody a really powerful computer and they just didn't know anything, they wouldn't be able to do anything as well. So it would be a multiplicative combination in reality, even for the Indian mind. So to have this research started, they would look at the combination of proficiency of users and power of the system. So we actually were able to get business managers to fill out these questionnaires, as well as a bunch of students. Now, to get students to, well, what we did in psychology, of course, was we make it a part of their course credit. They have to be in these experiments, they're voluntary. In India, they use something much more motivational. We promised to give them an ice cream cone if they filled out the questionnaires. And that really worked. So, so we gave them different combinations of these two. We got a little extravagant in coming up with different models of ways in which they might combine information, though, about computers, because they're very different. One of the models that we proposed was that people do really well if you kind of match the ability, you match a really proficient individual with a really powerful computer, and you match a person with not very good abilities with something that's kind of simple, less proficient. And so the highest points on each curve are essentially where we have that match in that top graph. The averaging model is just, parallel lines, you increase one or the other, and they increase in an averaging sort of way. And next to that is the multiplying model that shows the divergence of curves that we expect with human performance. There were a couple of other configural models at the bottom, a human computer model where it's kind of a ratio of the power of either the computer or the ability of the individual, or vice versa. So I'm not going to go into those two because those actually didn't come out. But what we did find was kind of a combination of averaging. Some individuals used averaging and other individuals used multiplying. So the graph at the top shows the data that were better fit to an averaging model. So about 25% were classified as averaging, and a little over 50% were classified as multiplying, and about 14 were just kind of jumbled. So we thought that was interesting. And kind of the bottom line to that was that the introduction to computers in India would be a really, really good thing. Back in those days of the early PCs, India decided that they would make their own PC. So they restricted the import of computers. So IBM was having a problem getting computers in, Apple as well. So I actually brought the first Apple Mac computer stuffed in a trunk. And I was going through customs, and they they said, well, what do you got? And I just said, oh, just some scientific equipment. And so I brought in this Apple computer. It was, you know, one of the very earliest ones. So it ran on a floppy disk. And it was very slow, but we got all of the research done using that and a printer. I also brought a guitar as well, so we could do some music here and there. When we were leaving, they were trying to buy the computer off of me, and I said, well, actually, it's property of the University of Maryland. I've got to go back with it. I can't leave it here. And so then they tried to buy the guitar off of me, and I said, well, this is my guitar. It's my only guitar. So I brought that back. So I regretted that, but oh well. So that's all the past research. And so now I'm kind of left with a few minutes to talk about how we might apply this to what we're really interested in, human-computer interaction. So let me stop just for a second to grab a breath and a drink of coffee and see if there's any questions at this point, and then jump into HCI.
Hopefully everybody has the ability to unmute, and I know, Eric, that you had a question. Maybe now would be a good time to ask that.
I don't want to necessarily take us all the way back, but during the experiment you talked about earlier, I noticed that when you had 3 stimuli, basically time, space, and money, right?
Right.
Because there was the fare, there was the distance, and there was how often the bus came. What I noticed was the money was, there were ratios, right, between a 15-cent fare and 45-cent fare.
Yes.
1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. So they were not.
And then you had ratios for time of 1, 2, and 4.
Yes.
And then the distance ratio was 1, 6, and 18. And I wondered whether that would be a complicating factor in attempting to create your weighted factorial model.
Okay, that's a really good question. We actually thought a lot about that at the time of either having equally spaced, but kind of going on the basis of scaling theory in psychology, things are generally not equally spaced. So we tried to get values that would be psychologically equidistant. Okay. Had we done it another way, everything would have still worked because we could have scaled those values, but it would have been harder to kind of get to the right range that we wanted. And you kind of, when you set these up, you have to have really kind of a representative range. So really, the best thing to do for real practical study would be to go out and look at actual bus systems and find out what are the typical values for these factors.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, anything else? All right, well, okay, so getting back then to how do we apply this to HCI? And I think one of the reasons that I kind of let the ball drop when I got into human-computer interaction was that typically we have, first we have to determine the factors that go into this study. And So we kind of spent a lot of time trying to do that. What are the factors that people use for assessing a computer system or a learning system? What are all the factors that go into user experience? I mean, it's large, and in a lot of cases we don't know. So we're really kind of in a quandary of what are they for the first many years. It's not easy because there's a lot of complexity just considering how things are designed and marketing and designing systems that people are going to use. So there are a lot of factors that are very complex. And so we got into this originally, Ben Schneiderman and I, with the questionnaire for user interaction satisfaction. And it's got tons of questions in it. So generally what we do when we've got a lot of different factors is use a correlational technique called factor analysis to reduce the large number of questions down to a smaller number of factors. And usually factor analysis, kind of comes down to about 7, often, I don't know, due to the, just due to the way in which things correlate and we can extract information from the data. In information integration theory, though, we really want to be able to come down to something more manageable, like 3 or 4, because if we try varying a larger number of factors, we get just so many different combinations. And when that happens, you have to rely on designs that, I tried teaching these in graduate statistics called fractional factorial designs, where you can have a lot of different combinations, but you use just parts of the design. And you have to have a lot of assumptions using that. And it's very, very complex doing it. So it turns a lot of people off. Let's see, go to next slide. Okay, you're seeing that slide. Oops, wait a second. Okay, so the questionnaire for interaction satisfaction, we had a lot of factors like those characters on the screen. These were actually broken down to sub-factors, highlighting, layouts, et cetera, et cetera. And so one would have to take a smaller number of factors. So I'm going to do this in the next slide, in which I might take the layout of the screens that might be confusing, good, or excellent. And the layout, we look at this all the time. I'm looking at, the screens in front of me now, and it can be confusing depending on the amount of information that's being presented. Other designs that can be really excellent on your phones, that you immediately see what's there, what's important, what's not important. And readability, sometimes it can be really hard on a screen. Some parts of the screen can be very difficult. So we can vary that from poor up to very good. And then we go from screen to screen to screen. That could be kind of illogical. Sometimes it's in an illogical order, and you have to back up and kind of scroll around to get to the screens that you want to. So a well-designed system is one that logically goes from one screen to the next and gets all of the work done. So this would lead to a 3x3 design. I've got 3 levels of 3 factors, so 27 different combinations. And we could do that, and could either do it to see how they combine this information, what kind of a model, averaging or multiplying, probably more likely kind of a multiplying model. Or a better way to do it would be if you're designing a new system to create different layouts. We never try in HCI to design something bad. We try to design something good. In some of my early experiments on menu selection, people made fun of me because I made menus that were really bad, just to see how bad they could be. We looked at menus that were in alphabetical order or in frequency of use order. And my favorite was the randomized alphabetical order. So every time you pulled the menu down, it was in a different random order with different multiple pull downs across the screen. And so it would take, our subjects forever to be able to find the right alternative that they were looking for. But it's useful actually to design bad systems to see, to in a sense, prove that your system is better, or to see how much it's better, or how much you should invest in making it better. So that's one thing to do with usability. Some of my research had to do with factors of computer rage. So I always keep a hammer by my computer. And in my backyard is a graveyard of computers. And so what we did find was, from a lot of the surveys that we did, was the worst thing a computer can do is when it crashes. That is just the bad thing. And now today it's like when the internet goes down. So, my wife was running a Zoom session in her watercolor class, and the internet goes down. Class canceled. So same thing. It's the most frustrating thing. Or waiting for a computer to finish something, you're just waiting there, and everybody else is waiting, trying to undo something. So we can vary these kinds of things to find out what is the most important system. So I might have alternatives about how frustrated would you be with a computer that crashed only about once a week, but was really fast, versus how frustrated would you be with a computer that never crashed, but it took a long time to do anything you wanted. We would always, kind of chide the computer industry, why can't you make a computer that never crashes? You can do everything else, make a lot of money, but you can do this for systems that are life critical, like airplanes. Well, I guess Boeing didn't do that. And other factors that we can combine to see experimentally instead of correlationally how people integrate information about computer rage. The last research that I got into is, before retiring, was the best interface of all, the video game. Most frustrating interface ever that kids and adults love and spend more and more hours at. So I looked at factors of video game immersion, and these were the factors that we typically found: visual presence, auditory presence, engagement, sense of control. And then the two negative ones are awareness of the controller, which button do I press? Which way do I go? And then awareness of the real world, when we started using the Nintendo Wii system, and you're actually moving around, and now with virtual reality, bumping into computers and hitting kids with a controller accidentally. So so these were all, again, correlational designs, but we could instead, I can go to the next one, ask questions about how immersed would you be with these characteristics, but better again to use actual examples of screenshots and controllers and things like that in a design, something like this. Again, using kind of a 3x3 by 3 design, and using the sub-factors combined in these two-way designs of sensory engagement and sense of control, awareness of controller. So those are kind of the proposals of where I would go if I weren't in retirement, but I am. And so in retirement, I'm actually trying to finish a book on the psychology of video games. But, it's becoming easier and easier to run experiments online. And so who knows, maybe I'll run one of these and I'll ask you to be a part of the study. And so that's all that I'm going to talk about. And I'm more than welcome to have questions, arguments, just no Zoom bombs.
I am opening the floor. You're welcome to put a question in the chat. However, you can take yourself off mute and add questions, ask questions directly. So please, please join us. And also one more request, you know, and I say this every week, but you know that. But if you wouldn't mind turning your camera on so we can all see each other. For many of us, we don't get to get out very much and see each other. So yay, I get to see real life people and I get to see, like, look, Pam, are you really at your garden or nice screen? Because you see my lovely decorated room that I have. Anybody's. Somebody, please take the floor, ask a question.
Kind of wondering how we would do a nice experiment on Zoom. So the experiment I keep doing is trying different backgrounds. I had a green screen in my stored away for like about 5 years, planning to do some videos, and finally with Zoom got it out and have tons of different virtual backgrounds.
I have a lot of fun playing with that too. So Jenny Priest texted in and said hi, but maybe she wants to say more. And I know Jonathan made a comment a little earlier about hooray for QUIS. Did I say it right, QUIS?
Yes.
I'll ask someone else already has a question. Sorry, I was gonna say I'll ask a quiz question otherwise. Diane, go ahead.
I didn't have so much of a question. I want to say hi, Kent. I know it's been ages. I haven't been doing much research, I have to admit, but one of the areas I was interested in is looking at using interactive systems and games in online learning, and was kind of curious of that angle. So kind of coming back around with that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, you know, it was always tempting to put in grant applications to do educational learning. But I always realized that the only way to do really good educational games is to make a AAA game, you know, and actually have a big studio do it. Because most of the games, other than Oregon Trail, are just really bad. And the kids realize it very quickly. And so too bad.
Yeah, I was thinking.
I encourage it a lot. You know, gamification is wonderful, but it's always been a failure for me, especially at home with our kids, raising our kids. And so I think probably the best way to do educational video games is to actually have kids play games that are out there and then use them as targets for what are you learning? What are you doing? What are you know, especially in things like Assassin's Creed, there's just tons of history to learn in these games, and you know, different ways of embedding, not having a separate game, but embedding puzzles and arithmetic and calculus and stuff in order to get to the next level, you know, and not die. You got to do that, but it's got to be really, really good and engaging.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hey, Kent, this is Tim Klausner. I have a question about, you're saying that early on you were using maximum likelihood estimations for your analysis. And what are you using now? I mean, so you mentioned a colleague that was using least squares regression. There are really good generalized LSR models now, model estimations. What are you using now?
Well, I'm going to take the easy out and say I'm retired, so I am not actively doing that kind of stuff. But I think, you know, your point is really, really well taken, because today you really need to stay up with the, you know, very, very, very latest procedures in any estimation techniques you're doing. And that's important. So, right.
Susan, you had a question about the Connect.
That was not so much a question. Hi. It was a comment about the instructional improvement grant to buy all of the game equipment for the video game class that was you were then using for experiments, which was awesome. And so it would, yeah, anyway, but hi.
Yeah, it's all obsolete now.
Yeah, I miss the Connect though. Like nobody's doing that kind of thing. Maybe nobody's living room is actually big enough.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems, the Connect. And though the last research that we were doing in my lab was using the PlayStation 4 VR system, and the last study was on virtual reality sickness. So we had the most obnoxious games that were so well designed to make you sick.
So glad I graduated.
Yeah, I know, because you did not like VR at all.
Oh my God.
But as you know, my lab was just right across the hallway from the restrooms. And we always had a barf bag on hand. And right, this is why I would not invest in VR, as compelling as it is. It's only for the, a select few of males that can handle it. We did, you will find about 20% of the population will have some reaction to VR, and you can't stay in it very long. I mean, I pushed the limit once in Resident Evil, and after that, I mean, I actually stopped playing VR for like a year. After that, my son has gotten into it with a very nice Vive system in his room. But again, he's not on it very often at all. So, oh well.
Yep. I think Josh had a question. I don't know if he's still on. Looks like no.
Okay, let me change my obnoxious background.
Diane, you had a hand raised, but had you already asked your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot to put my hand down.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Anybody else? Well, thanks. Oh, look at you. Fancy pants. I want to put another plug in. Tonight is our HCIL alumni reunion. And hopefully, if you're interested, you can send me an email. If you haven't seen the promos, I can send you the link to that. But a big round of applause, everybody. Thank you, Kent, so much. Let's see my round of applause. Get it?
Hooray, Kent, hooray.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
QUIS forever, QUIS forever.
Yes. And just so we can give a plug for next week, which we always do, and I'm waiting for my screen to load. Hang on a minute. Hang on. Next week, Bill Killam. He's going to be speaking. He's an adjunct professor, and he's going to be talking about the colorectal cancer risk assessment tool, a case study. And he's also giving a tutorial at the symposium. We're a couple of months out, but May 27th is our symposium. We are all remote, and you will see a lot more about that in the coming weeks and months. But next week, I hope to see you all here, and I appreciate everybody coming out. And thank you very much, Kent, for joining us. We're very appreciative. Thank you. All right. All right, everybody. We will see you again next week. Thanks for coming.